welcome to the ID Talk podcast. My name is Peter Counter, and I'm the editor-in-chief of FindBiometrics and Mobile ID World, where we are celebrating our fall special event, Digital Transformation in the Enterprise. Presented in association with our premier converged security partner, ISC West, Digital Transformation in the Enterprise saw us exploring one of the most influential trends in biometrics through featured articles, product launches, and expert interviews. It all culminated in the ISC West 2020 virtual event, where ID Talk co-host Susan Stover moderated an educational panel, Enabling Digital Transformation with Biometrics and Mobile ID. And that is what we are presenting today on this special episode of ID Talk. Susan is joined by BioConnect CTO and CISO Courtney Gibson, BioKey CEO and Chairman Mike DePasquale, and Iris ID Business Development Manager Tom DeWinter, in order to discuss fraud threats facing businesses as they rush to enable digital transformation safely, and how biometrics and mobile ID technologies will enable it. It's a fascinating conversation that delves into some of the most critical identity and access issues facing businesses of all sizes, and I know you're going to love it. So without further ado, here is the ISC West panel, Enabling Digital Transformation with Biometrics and Mobile ID, right here on ID Talk.
Hello, everyone. I'm Susan Stover, VP of Digital Content here at FindBiometrics and Mobile ID World, and welcome to today's panel, Enabling Digital Transformation with Biometrics and Mobile ID. Before we get started, I wanted to give a little background on the topic. As organizations adapt to new technologies that cater to the accessibility and convenience demands of modern users, businesses are embracing mobile channels, IoT, artificial intelligence, and automation. Friction has become the new F word, as a smooth user experience has taken priority, bringing with it better customer and employee satisfaction with lower administration costs. But as we all know, this push for digital transformation has expanded the fraud attack surface. Over 15 billion credentials are currently on sale in the dark web, according to a recent Digital Shadows report. And fraud's been steadily on the rise in recent years, with research from Javelin Strategy showing that account takeover fraud has increased 72% year over year in 2019. Meanwhile, the front door has become a bottleneck for businesses, given the COVID-19 pandemic response measures, including physical distancing, mask wearing, and wellness declarations. Indeed, the pandemic has accelerated the remote working, mobile-first trends that have been already gaining momentum in the last 5 years. And just as it was in 2019, the answer to security challenges of digital transformation is strong authentication powered by biometrics and mobile ID. For nearly a decade, mobile authentication and biometric technologies have been helping forward-thinking businesses stay safe and secure during digital transformation, and these solutions have evolved on their way to eliminate passwords, PINs, tokens, and improve security both in physical and digital spaces. Now it's time for not just high-tech companies that are looking for identity and authentication solutions. It's everyone adapting to the unique challenges of today. And the core of that digital transformation is user identity and authentication. Biometrics and mobile ID technologies are bridging the gap between physical and digital spaces, enabling stronger security, greater accountability, and a more efficient workplace ready to tackle whatever the new normal holds. And that's what we're here to talk about today. It's my pleasure to introduce our panelists, Courtney Gibson, CTO and CISO BioConnect, Mike DePasquale, Chairman and CEO of BioKey, and Tom DeWinter, Manager of Business Development of Iris ID. So I'd like to start our panel today by starting off with my first question, which is, what are the greatest fraud and security threats facing enterprises right now in the fall of 2020? Courtney, why don't we start with you?
Thanks, Susan. I think really, in my mind, it comes down to three main tranches of concern. One is working from home. The second is that leaves some empty offices, and then the third really is dollar constraints that businesses are facing. And I think each of those has its own set of problems. With people working from home, there's not only just a need to understand the identity of the people who are connecting to your systems and working remotely, but we have all very rapidly across enterprises had to, over the last few months, ingest a lot of new technology to support that. I think we're all still catching up in some areas on understanding how that's changed our security borders and our security footprint of the enterprise. And because people are working from home, there is more intellectual property in flight now than I think has ever been, as people have to share documents, ideas, have conversations, do e-signatures, do their jobs from places that aren't necessarily where they would have been doing them inside a protected building a number of months ago. So that's certainly changing. I think, as people work from home, obviously offices are a little bit emptier now. That increases security risk, but as people start to return to work, there's concerns around health screening, friction points that now show up in the enterprise. Elevators can't run as full. Perimeters are moving out to the sidewalk even more in terms of keeping unauthorized people outside of the building, and that puts visitor management pressure on. It puts pressure on deliveries and loading docks. And finally, all around that are dollar concerns, where people need to be concerned about the money they're spending on security guards and variable supplier-based costs to their businesses, and need to get data to support those decisions and make sure they're making the right trade-offs in how security is coming together. So I think there's a whole spectrum of challenges from desktops at home to hallways and loading bays that we're all facing.
Tom, what about you?
Courtney has some good comments there. I think right now, to be quick, I think the different level of the people and how they're being affected throughout the United States and globally right now is a big concern. Some are being affected quite a bit and some aren't at all. But I would say the number one thing that comes to mind now is that everybody is becoming familiar with this word called the cloud, which only a small percentage of people were really familiar with it early on. Now everybody knows the cloud, if you will. But the cloud, if the cloud is penetrated right now, you're going to affect everybody, no matter what level of spectrum they are using any kind of digital transformation. So I think if you look at all the different levels, every single one of them is somehow touching some kind of cloud infrastructure now. And so I think that's probably what keeps awake some of the people who really are looking at this from a very high level angle down, if you will. So that's one of my biggest things, because the cloud penetration or security on that will certainly have ripple effects through all kinds of applications.
And Mike, what are your thoughts?
Well, a lot of good comments from Tom and Courtney as well. Surely work from home is a dynamic that's impacted virtually every enterprise that has the capability to be able to, again, support remote work. But the second dynamic, I believe, is the fact that more and more people are working from home or have been forced home, given that many have been furloughed or have lost their jobs. E-commerce in general has spiked dramatically over the last 4 months. And as that has spiked, obviously more and more people are transacting from an e-commerce perspective on computers from home, and in particular mobile devices. And that in and of itself creates a whole different level of security risk and opportunity for e-commerce type e-tailers and retailers. So that is kind of the second component. And I think that in general, we're going to see, as they write the book, post-COVID, we're going to see that all of these things ultimately created a lot of risk, for sure, but they also generated a lot of revenue and business for many companies, again, on the retail side, that had the good fortune to have transformed their businesses through digital transformation over the past couple of years to support it.
And now that we've identified these different threats, what are different ways that biometric security and mobile ID technologies are being applied to address these threats? Tom, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Well, obviously, authentication is key, and we were able to skate along the surface for many years in authentication came from, a credential, a driver's license, for instance, that we ended up realizing was not as secure as people thought. And different levels of different authentication have been used for so many years across so many different platforms that eventually, obviously, everybody has come to realize that these IDs are not very secure, or that can be replicated, especially with all this transformation to the digital platform. So the biometric and tying a token to actually what somebody is has become paramount, where it was used in simple applications years and years ago. Now it's being used to log in to perform that e-commerce transaction in some applications, as Mike said as well. So tying that biometric, whether it be a finger, face, iris that I work in, or vein, or gait, is just another layer, and albeit a very strong layer, to create and generate that authentication.
Mm-hmm. And Mike, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree 100%. For sure, biometric authentication, especially in what we just discussed, work from home, or in the context of e-tailing and transactions for a retail purchase, are critical and important. But the only way that you can positively identify an individual that's behind a device, whether again that be a computer or a handheld mobile device, is really a biometric. Tokens, cards, keys, pins, all of those things that we've used for years, that we continue to still use today, really don't differentiate between any individual that's behind that device. And so biometrics are really the only way to do that. And to do that, especially now again in this COVID venue, where employees for the enterprise are accessing all of the corporate backends, mostly in the cloud, but it could be, again, VPN through to on-premise applications. The only way that we know it's not a proxy or someone else doing their work, or, for example, a relative or a friend, is a biometric. It's really the only way that we can assure that those individuals are who they say they are.
And Courtney?
Oh, I think Mike and Tom have covered it well. I think I agree. I think COVID has been an accelerant of a lot of change, and I think exactly to echo Mike's point, I think people are changing rapidly their views of the difference in safety that's brought about with biometric identification versus simply identifying things. We need to identify people if we're going to build trusted transactions. So I think it's accelerated a shift towards an understanding of the importance of biometrics, in the enterprise security space. I think it's accelerated an adoption even within the consumer area, as people have been moving into that online e-commerce and sort of changing shopping habits. And I think, I'm also seeing questions come in from customers where now that they have trusted identity sitting in some of these logs and systems, there's really a desire then to use that identity as well, not just simply as a gateway measure to let people in, or check when people are exiting, but to use it not just as a perimeter, but a view into your whole ecosystem, and see how are people moving and transacting and dealing through the day, in order to make more informed decisions about how we're spending dollars, how we're building security, how we're building our environments for people to work in, whether they're virtual environments or real environments. So I've seen a lot of applications for data analytics increasing as well, to sharpen efficiency and sharpen spend, in addition to sort of the gateway parameters that we tend to see biometrics used for.
And how do biometrics and strong identity change the relationship between businesses, their employees, and their customers? And how do organizers implementing this new technology ensure a smooth transition through digital transformation for users? Mike, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, for sure. I think Courtney started to go here. The relationship between the individual, the consumer, the customer, and the enterprise gets dramatically stronger as we have trust and we have a binding, identity that that company can count on and that that individual can count on as it relates to a consummation of a transaction or access to, that particular company. So I think that's absolutely critical. And for sure, the past 6 months have created an acceleration for most technology companies, most e-tailers, to ensure they have that binding, digital identity. And so we're seeing more and more opportunity for biometrics that, again, create, as we just discussed, the only way to create that positive, identification or that positive binding trust is really that biometric. And it doesn't really matter what biometric mode, it's biometrics in general. So that to me is the way that relationship is going to change. And that creates it could create incremental opportunity, right, for businesses. It creates incremental opportunity for the consumer and the business user to have less friction. And it's all about friction, right? Because, and just to regress a little bit, when we talk about biometrics, by the way, passwords are very, very secure. If they're 12 characters and they use, all kinds of special characters and caps and, and underscores and so forth, they could be very, very safe, especially if they're kept private and changed every 2 weeks. The problem is that, we have 100 passwords that we now use on a daily basis, and we can't change them, we can't remember them, we use them over and over again and all that other stuff. So it's not just about security, it's about ease of use, friction, and the relationship gets better as it's easier to, again, communicate back and forth with a positive and trusted identity.
And Courtney, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I agree. I think fundamentally what it comes down to is the higher the level of trust between consumers and an enterprise, or between enterprises and employees, the higher the level of trust exists, the higher the value of a transaction you can safely conduct. And I think, as the expectation has accelerated for business and transactions to move online, consumers are now feeling and demanding closure of some gaps where, pardon me, where we simply haven't, the old, some of the older security models around, ink-based signatures on paper and, in-person business, is quickly showing it can't scale to address the needs of people that need to be able to, work at a distance or work differently or conduct business internationally without being able to, fly between countries or even between cities. So I think we're going to see more and more high-value transactions taking place online. That's going to require higher trust to facilitate it, and absolutely, biometrics are the way to get there. And I think the good news is there are already a lot of technologies that people are using today that can be bridged together and sort of create that ecosystem without introducing a lot of new tools and a lot of new PII and a lot of new templates floating around. So I'm intrigued to see how the industry responds with leveraging existing tools that are out there in order to create more security without creating larger pockets of either new tools or pockets of more PII and more templates and more private information sitting around in order to accomplish that.
And Tom?
Well, I think those are all great. I would add too that he's trying to see a faster transformation of where the businesses, the customers, and the employees, and everybody else, the peripheral, all has to come into this trust circle, which in the olden days, and Mike, Courtney, and I have been around doing this for some time now, and many years. The decision was made by the business or the corporation for a couple of secure areas, perhaps in one area, or it was one particular type of area for a facility. Now what you're seeing is that trust circle and the authentication and the PII and the human resources side and the human capital management side of companies has to bring in the employees, the customers, and anybody who delivers to the facility, anybody who comes into the facility, anybody who uses point of sale at the facility. So that's expanded the use now of these biometric solutions, certainly. But of course, they open up some extra paperwork to be done, and HR teams have to learn a little bit more about this than they did in the past. And you're seeing emerge now between the physical security people and the HR security teams and the HR employment and onboarding teams. So there's a bigger world now looking into this in more detail.
And how do you expect the digital and physical security spaces to evolve in the coming years, given the industry factors that we discussed today? Courtney?
I think on the digital side, I agree with Mike's point. I think passwords can be made to be safe. But there's a real challenge in that, right? I think just we've all seen the statistics on the number of stolen identities and leaked passwords, and the problem is that we conduct a lot of secure business on an assumption that some secret that I have is going to remain secret, and the problem is that those secrets need to be distributed in order for you to conduct business with the person on the other end of the line. Rather than secret-based authentication, I think in the digital world, we're going to see an acceleration of biometric-based authentication to try to positively identify the people on the other end of the transaction. So I think in the digital space, I see an accelerated future for biometric adoption there. On the physical side, I think I think this may be one of these factors that's going to be rolled out sort of at different speed in different geographies, because some places I think are already here. But if I look around buildings in Canada, if I look around buildings in smaller cities in the U.S., there's not the presence of turnstiles at the sidewalk and sort of immediate physical barriers when you get into larger office spaces. We're going to have to change for health and security reasons. I think buildings are going to push security perimeters out to the outside, which means then you need to start dealing with identity right at the curb for employees, for guests, for delivery people, for contractors coming in, and trying to deal with that through white plastic access cards and that sort of thing doesn't scale either. So I think there's a biometric role there as well for keeping friction low, security high, and ease of access up as well. So I think those are the two main trends I see there.
And Tom, what are your thoughts?
I agree with that. I think I've worked with companies and very large companies who all siloed a lot of this biometric authentication to one particular area, and now they're dealing with it right to Courtney's point, right at the gateway to come in, whether it's a delivering company, and whether it's an employee, whether it's a consultant coming in, that are all being looped into increasing the authentication and who they are. And so that means the biometrics roll out even further and further across the whole organization. And naturally, then we have to look as an industry too to how we make sure we secure these technologies and applications.
Mm-hmm. And Mike, how do you expect the digital and physical security spaces to evolve in the coming years?
I think it's going to evolve significantly over the next 3 to 4 years for sure, where again, as we talked about before, a binding identity not only allows you access to all of the logical assets that you may be entitled to access, but also the physical assets that you have, again, access to, for sure. It makes sense. And the technology is mature enough today, in particular with biometrics, to be able to address both of those in a very clean and succinct way. And so I think you're going to see the unification of logical and physical assets and security to access them really come together much, much more quickly over the next few years than they have over the last 10.
And what tools are out there to ensure privacy compliance? Tom?
Well, I think you're seeing now the anything that was related, especially to the HR side and for instance, the SHRM organization, Society for Human Resource, they have benchmarks. The HIPAA compliance and healthcare people have benchmarks as well, and they're trying to get this head around, or their head around these applications and what they can do with the biometrics and how they can leverage them to their favor. So I think that's still a market in an area where people are trying to figure out what they did in the past and what they can do in the future and how they can leverage that. So there's a lot of compliance laws that are now being passed, some of them being passed maybe a little bit too quickly, some of them not quick enough. I think all of us in the biometrics area are familiar with some of the state laws being passed now that a lot of them really need to be looked at more carefully. But it's a moving solution right now, and we're working to see what it can help. I'm very interested in hearing what Courtney and Mike think on that as well.
Yeah, Mike, what are your thoughts?
Well, for sure. There's a lot of legislation that's now being circulated. It's been happening over the last 2 years. Things like BIPA, the Biometrics Information Privacy Act, that's going state to state. But more importantly, I think we can ensure privacy. We don't need legislation as much as we need opt-in, and to ensure that, as a company, as an entity, that if people are uncomfortable using that particular technology, they have the option to do something else, to go back to, for example, a traditional password or, a token or card or a key. So opt-in is one way that I think we can ensure that people are comfortable with this technology as it becomes more commonplace, and will become more commonplace over time. Because I think once you get it and you realize biometrics can actually provide a greater level of privacy if managed the right way and managed appropriately. And there's a lot of fear and consternation out there that, if you enroll in a biometric solution, that once you're enrolled, if it's compromised, your life is over. That is so untrue. And there's a lot of fear that's being spread that's not appropriate as it relates to biometrics. But for sure, if you are concerned, just opt out, and you'll see that creates a level of friction that perhaps your colleagues don't have to go through to utilize or to access all of the solutions and systems and cloud applications that are available.
And Courtney, you're shaking your head quite a bit.
I am, yeah. And I think actually I may just even take a step back on the question, because it's, I think it's implicit in this conversation, but I just want to draw it out. There is, when we talk about biometrics, I think implicitly in this conversation, we've been talking about building trust, identifying people, creating security. And I think it's important to acknowledge there is a spectrum of uses for biometric technology that range from sort of tracking and surveillance, applications through to trust binding. And I think what we have been talking about here is using positive bound identity to make sure that we're conducting safe transactions with employees, with customers, securing buildings and data. And in my mind, I think there is a lot of emerging legislation around biometric use. And I think a lot of, to be frank, in my mind, what's driving that is some of the surveillance and tracking applications of biometrics versus the security and trust binding end of biometrics. And it's probably important, just even discussing sort of privacy and compliance. I think those are two very different baskets. I think, in either realm, I think you have a bit of a biased panel here. I think my colleagues have also been working hard for years to build secure, sort of privacy sensitive systems. And I think, though, there is an acknowledged reality that we need to be careful as we're connecting systems and we are extending out the borders of what we're building, there have been some good and some not so great examples of how people are exposing and sharing PII in the course of offering up APIs and connection points between systems. And I think as an industry, we do need to be careful and ask questions about where is data living and where are we sharing it, and how are we centralizing core identity components while still building trust. And I think that's something that we all need to continue to work on as we build products out.
So we are coming to the end of our time, but I just wanted to ask one final question and get kind of a brief answer from all of you. Is what advice do you have for organizations out there who are looking for converged security options right now? Mike?
Well, for sure, look at everything that relates to an all-inclusive, as Courtney mentioned, solution that brings into play privacy, compliance, that meets the needs of not only your logical access requirements, but also your physical access requirements. Standards are really, really important. And there's enough of really good material out there on quality and accuracy if it relates again to biometrics. For sure, there's a plethora of solutions. There's a lot of really, really good quality biometric capability out there. Do your research, and for sure, look at it in a holistic or from a holistic perspective.
Courtney?
I think there's two trends that I would that I'm certainly following closely, and I think one is on the platform side. How do you future-proof your technologies and look at sort of digital physical convergence? I think there's a lot of interesting applications coming up to allow users to self-serve themselves in order to build better data for the enterprise by bringing together your digital systems and your physical systems. So I think there's some unification technologies that are interesting. And I think there's also a lot of emerging technology looking at not just who are you, but how are you in terms of in terms of health status, in terms of location and behavior. I think there's interesting sort of layered technologies coming on as well that I think are going to help future-proof investments in platforms as you build into them.
And Tom,
I think those are all great points. I would echo everything there said, as well as say that there's a lot of companies out there doing different things. I would spend a little time vetting some of the companies, ask for references, don't be shy about starting a small project and dipping your toe in, so to speak, to try a couple different modalities and applications, but look into the backgrounds and ask for references and be aggressive with that point too, because there are a lot of things out there that are still being vetted themselves. And if you're going to be a pilot project, you're better off knowing it ahead of time than finding out behind. So, that's always a very good model to follow.
well, thank you all for answering my questions today, and I'm looking forward to seeing what the audience has to say.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And so concludes our panel, presented with ISC West and SIA Education. Thank you to our event partners for facilitating the discussion. Join in the festivities of ISC West 2020 and keep your finger on the pulse of the converged security market at iscwest.com. I would like to thank Courtney, Mike, and Tom for participating in this event, and thank you as always to my co-host Susan Stover for conducting the interview. Stay tuned to ID Talk as we continue these conversations of digital transformation in the enterprise, and stay posted to FindBiometrics and Mobile ID World for all your biometrics and digital identity news and thought leadership. Our podcast theme music is by Logomrad. I have been your host, Peter Counter. Thank you for listening to the ID Talk podcast.